Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport in right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypearce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. Hi there, listeners. Welcome to Cycling in Alignment.
We're driving through the Johnson Tunnel, which seems to be the reason why we were just sat in traffic going uphill for so long, because it goes from 4 lanes to 2.
That looks like a giant Johnson. Indeed.
10 points for anyone that knew that was Austin Powers.
I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? But if you call your ship a butt, call your butt a ship, anyone who knows that gets 100 points.
100 points.
For sure. Very well. We just finished Steamboat Gravel.
Steamboat Gravel.
Which, when you say it with vowels, is Steamboat Gravel. But vowels are so 2018, so we no longer use vowels.
Gravel is vowelist.
Gravel is basically racist against vowels.
Yeah.
It only accepts consonants.
If you're an A, an I, an E, or an O, you are not welcome here.
You may not participate.
Gravel is all-inclusive, except for vowels.
Except for vowels. But Steamboat is very inclusive. They had this new format with this FEMS, 3-person women teams that got to ride together. That was pretty cool.
That was cool. It was cool to pass them as well. There was you could see there was real camaraderie and actual teamwork going on.
They were psyched.
All sorts of levels and differences. It was pretty rad.
Yeah, they were having fun. Steamboat does a good job with that. This was a new format, though. The race was completely different than years past.
First of all, it wasn't in Steamboat.
For starters, the race wasn't.
No.
The ride was. There was a ride on Saturday.
For context, for people that don't know, Steamboat Gravel was a race I did in my first year of gravel, and it was probably the biggest takeaway race that I had a big takeaway from, I should say, in that first season. In that it was so much fun. There were all these cool community rides. There were rides out with kids. There was a whole lot of focus on diversity. Amy Charity wants to see more people of color, more people of all sizes, all genders, whichever you identify with, feeling welcome in a sport. And I think that was really one of the coolest things about being at the race, was all of the little accoutrements around the actual fact that we were doing a bike race at some point. It was really special. But unfortunately, the community in Steamboat, for whatever reason, we don't need to get into whether it's right or wrong, seemed to feel that it was a big inconvenience to have this huge bike race for so many days with all these different rides going on. So they've had to create a workaround to work with the community, which is something I always thought that they did do and aim to do anyway. They have all these committee boards and welcome people, but they've had to listen to the place in which they hold the race, which is other people's homes, and they have split the event, where Saturday now is actually a ride. It's kind of Gran Fondo-esque, but with no prizes, no finish line, no winner. Well, there's a finish line, but there's no winner.
Finish line, and there were times, and there were allegedly people who, air quotes, won the race and were posting about it, but it was billed clearly as not being a race. So,
Correct.
There's that.
And that's in Steamboat, and that was on a Saturday, and it was capped at 1,800 individual, 1,500,
something like that.
And they had to monitor that really strictly, because there may have been some people in the community that would have counted it. And if it was one over, maybe they would have lost their favor to, do the same thing again.
Yeah.
It looked awesome. The village was popping.
Mm-hmm.
Vibes were great. It was really hot.
Mm-hmm.
They had all these cool like water cooling stations that you could walk under like water vapor and get misted out.
Yeah.
And, they're always looking out for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do that event. We came just for the bike race, which is actually on Saturday, and it's in a very small town, but very charming, very cute, very kind of Colorado mountain town. There was a place called the Granary, which was an old grain silo converted into a cool little cafe.
Mm-hmm.
Had a sort of like rustic Americana going on, old bikes, wagon wheels, water pumps. It was very, very charming.
Yeah.
And there was a cool brewery in the town as well. And the main street didn't have much going on, but it definitely seems like a town that's gonna
pop a bit.
Gonna pop a little bit. For all you experimental investors out there, Hayden, Colorado, get amongst it. It's probably pretty cheap right now.
Yep.
The race started at the mustard ground, or the showground where they do mustards and probably rodeos and things like that. So this is like super, super mountain America. And the format of the race this year was completely different. Steamboat used to be a huge loop that started and finished in the same place. Super challenging. It went like ridiculously high in elevation. I think the average elevation may have been 2,300 meters, which for those speaking freedom units, what's that in feet?
Around 8,500, I believe.
Yeah, so that was right. The average, whereas fortunately for me, this race only went as high as 2,300 meters, but that still absolutely knocks my face off when we get up there. But there were different categories in the race. So they had a shorter version, which was 2 laps of this really cool course, and the elite race was 3 laps. They sent us all off at really big gap differences, so that there was no way that the elite men's or women's races affected each other, and also that the amateur category, I don't like calling it that, but that's what it was called.
The gravel enthusiast category?
The gravel enthusiast category, people who love racing gravel bikes.
Do 3 or 2, the pro women?
They did 3.
They did 3.
They did 3.
So equal distance, equal pay kind of thing?
Yeah, well, that's kind of SBT's thing.
Yeah.
Cool. And it was quite funny. I came across with big gravel tires on my bike, kind of fast rolling gravel tires with a little bit of grip, knowing that I was going to be in Colorado mountains, which seemed to be a mix of champagne gravel and some technical stuff. So you kind of have to think big. And then we found out from a friend that he'd ridden it, and he was like, dude, you could ride road tires. And we watched some videos from the course preview, and I went, I'm going to take the ultimate risk and put on some 34 mil road tires.
Because it really was, I mean, of the loop, which was 40 miles or about 65K or whatever that is, 70K, something like that. Like, what? Probably 15K of straight pavement and another maybe 30K of like gravel that was like mag chloride, almost tarmac.
Yeah, I actually had to touch it, and I still couldn't tell if it was like a kind of road or if it was gravel.
Yeah.
I'm told it's gravel with like some oil sprayed on it. But it was like super packed and super fast. And I thought everyone was going to turn up with slicks, and to my giddy little smile at the start line, everyone still had like 40s and 45s on, because they think that the science suggests that they roll just as fast as a road tire. But I've never been in a gravel race where I felt like my bike was floating as much as it has. There was like no traction challenge, except for some of the downhills. But I actually find that if you have like a 40 mil or a 45 mil slick tire, that's actually less grippy than a road tire, because you have a tire that really digs into where it's going. There's so much force on a small surface area with a road tire. And if you can really get to that like bedrock of whatever that road is, it really grips.
Whereas the 45 kind of floats over the top and is a little more swimmy.
Yeah, so it like stays on the like sprinkled gravel that sits on top of the road. And we'll get to grip and stuff in a bit, but it was really fun being on the bike that was the fastest for the day. It was not why I didn't win. I didn't win because I wasn't good enough, but I definitely had a bike that gave me every chance to, and would have been pretty cool to actually finish on these tires first and just be like, yeah,
Whoa.
throw that into your debate and smoke it. But, I've ridden Strada Bianchi a lot of times, and we used to race on 25 mil tires on stuff that was way looser, way slippery, and way more unpredictable than we did today. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't a gravel race. So what's your thought on that? Because I think it was definitely a gravel race.
It was definitely a gravel race. Yeah, there were 3 big climbs. None of them particularly steep, although some of them were pretty long. Like the first one from real beginning to end was 16K. It didn't go up the entire time, but it went up definitely most of the time. There were a couple little teeny downhills that barely give you a teaser of recovery. And it was not particularly steep. I don't know what the average was, probably 3% or something, but had a few kicks. But man, it just went on. It was
like a 50-minute effort from the bottom to the top of the second climb, which was really an extension of the first main climb.
Yeah.
With a little rest in the middle.
Yeah. You felt like you were going up or down all day, even though your race was
188 kilometers.
188K, and it had 2,600 meters of climbing.
Yeah.
So that's freedom units. That's like 112 miles, I think. Or 118, something like that. And about plus or minus about 6,000 feet of climbing. So, not a ton of climbing for that distance, but certainly not nothing.
But right? You were climbing for 60% of the race.
Yeah.
That was what was quite a strange sensation in the body. It's actually how long you spent under load from climbing.
There wasn't a lot of flat road. You were always falls flat uphill or downhill, almost always, at least, or properly climbing. So not a race that suited me particularly well.
No.
Climber Colby Pearce, as I was once accused of being in Ireland, and all my teammates who knew me laughed pretty hard when they heard that. But yeah, it was definitely a gravel race. And even with the descents were not particularly challenging, in particular in comparison to the past years of Steamboat. Like last year, the Black Horse. You weren't here for this, Nathan, but they changed the Black Horse and made it much more aggressive. And it was really quite technical. A lot of real downhills, they added this double track climb. I can't remember the name of it, but it was properly like almost a goat path in places. And then you went down the other side and it was just straight down, super high speed, super rough, super washboardy, super loose and sandy, high speed stuff. And you need to be a real bike handler to do that. But then there was this middle section last year that was, I think it was almost an hour long. And it was a slight uphill with a lot of twists and turns with like deep, loose sand.
Oh.
And that just blew, like no one really knew about that except the few people who had properly pre-ridden or the locals. It blew the groups apart there because people don't really do that well. And that's a place where you want the 45s.
Oh, for sure. Or 50s.
Yeah. The bigger tire you had, the more you floated. And lighter weight riders had an advantage there for sure. And I really enjoyed that section, having raced cyclocross for so long. But there was nothing even close to that this year. The descents were comparatively, and even by gravel standards, extremely mild. There were 4 corners, I would say, per lap. And I did 2 laps, so 8 corners where it was like, okay, I really have to pay attention here or I'm going to fall over. And in those corners, I was like, one of the things I wanted to speak with you about is both of us commented on how, I don't want to be a dick, but how dreadful some people's handling skills are on gravel. And that was, both of us kind of made that observation, right? There were groups I was in today where riders were super strong. I was riding with them for an hour or so. We're rotating through. We're on kind of gentle flowing downhills, and they're doing just the same thing I am. And then we went through these couple of corners that were proper on a real grade downhill, loose. You had to pick the right line. You had to monitor your speed. It was a mixture of, we'll say, strawberry-sized rocks, sand, maybe some washboard, and also that surface of the sand on top of the hard stuff was sort of scattered, so you weren't sure what you were going to get in the corner. And they were real corners. They were greater than 90 degrees. So a proper corner, but I was shocked at how I just dumped these people in 2 corners on one descent. These people that I'd ridden with the last hour and were definitely as strong as me, probably stronger. And I never saw them again the rest of the day in 2 corners. So to me, that's quite interesting because it suggests that when you're thinking about the complete picture of cycling skills, right? Or cycling, we'll say abilities, encompassing all things. You need to have a good engine. You need to have lactate tolerance. You need to have some explosive power. You need to have a high threshold and a high VO2 max. All the other little physiological things that we can think about and focus on. You also need to be able to go around a couple corners, roughly in comparison to your peer group at the same speed. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on, like, what do you think is causing that delta in riders' engine size versus their handling abilities?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and a good point to make, which is, sometimes you even have riders who are in the WorldTour. They were really good descenders in the WorldTour on the road. A little anecdote is I was warming up with Pete Stettner and Boswell before the race, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're going to run those tires today?" And I was like, "Man, they're like 8 mil bigger than I used to run at Strade Bianchi, and puncture resistance is amazing." And they were like, "Yeah, you can get away with it because you've got skills." And I was like, "Come on, man, like, you've been riding long enough."
Boswell was your teammate on Katusha.
Yeah, and Boswell's like, "Yeah, but one thing that I just never evolved was ever feeling comfortable when my tires are drifting at all." I thought that was kind of interesting, right? Because drifting is such a fundamental part of riding off-road. I was kind of lucky maybe in the sense that I grew up actually doing off-road. I don't think I rode a road bike until I was 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And I'd been doing dirt jumps and downhill mountain biking and cross-country mountain biking for a long time before that. So for me, drifting actually kind of always felt like a little bit of a no-brainer. Like, it was actually just, that's how you go around corners, is you kind of got to find that edge, and then it starts going, you loosen it off. But
to be clear, are you talking about rear-wheel drifting, front-wheel drifting, or both wheels? Because those are, to me,
those are two different things.
They are very different things. That's why I wanted to distinguish.
Oh, well, all of the above and all separate.
Okay. Yes, and yes.
For example, if I'm coming into one of these downhill corners on the bike, and we're looking at a road that is super wide. This is not one car road. This is easily 3-lane wide dirt road. This could handle massive trucks coming both ways and still have room on either edge. You're coming down at speed, and you're setting yourself up with gravel. You always start by taking the innermost line, not like on road, by taking the outermost line and coming in and then coming out.
Right.
The best way is to actually start by cutting as early as possible, and then seeing if the front tire starts to drift a little bit. And if it does, you actually just open the hypotenuse of that corner. So you're kind of creating a triangle from where you're aiming to go and now where you have to go. But because you've cut in early, you have a really big run out area to actually still be able to make that corner in control. So it's sort of like a series of like trimming the sail by tipping it in. Okay, you feel like a tiny movement in the front. You straighten it up.
Whoa, too much.
And then you dip it again. And
so what you're saying, if I can just translate that one more way, I think cutting the hypotenuse is a good way to say it. But I think what you're saying is you start, so let's say you're taking a right-hand turn. Classically, you would line up on the left side on a road. You'd start wide, you would cut the apex. So at the apex of the corner on the inside, you would be at the extreme right gutter. This is assuming you had a clear road, obviously, right? And then you would exit on the left side of the road. But in gravel, you basically hug the right side of the road going into the corner. You enter with less speed to account for that. But then since the surface
most of the time, but not always.
Not always, right? Yeah, I'm generalizing. And since the surface is less predictable, right? You get there, and sometimes the surface changes in the corner, no doubt. Or you have options, like you have a berm you can work with. I'm getting too far ahead. And if you feel the front wheel, so you start to go into the corner, and you feel the front wheel moving a bit or a bit uneasy about it, then you would turn less sharply, effectively.
Yeah, so you will straighten by correcting the wheel to the left.
Yeah. Thank you. And want to make sure that was...
And the reason why we don't line up on the left side of the road like you would on a motorbike or a road bike or a race car is that if you start tipping the bike in towards the right and you're all the way left, and all of a sudden you have a loss of traction or that same feeling in the front wheel, there is no room to autocorrect.
Because you're already on the left side of the road.
You're already on the left. So you've got two options.
You cut the hypotenuse and all of a sudden you're off the road.
You've got two options.
Yeah.
chuck on a whole lot of brake, which creates its own type of drift, which is just like a skid. It puts a heavy compression through the body, so you're no longer relaxed. You start to feel every single bump, which then also means that you're not able to really like tip the bike and let the wheels actually contour through the corner, because now that there is a tension through the hub, the wheel is actually not operating like it would have if it was under less brake or no brake.
Right.
Or the other option is that you're just forced to straighten up and you just go straight off the road.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of the nervousness actually comes in for riders for fast, loose surface corners in gravel. Because the natural inclination is to not set up, first of all, correctly for a gravel corner, which is always on the inside of the corner starting there, to account for the fact that the bike probably is going to wiggle at some point. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's great. You just get to kind of like grip it and rip it. But most of the time, you actually have to assume that it is going to move just a little bit, and you have to get comfortable at feeling the bike move underneath you. But it's a controlled thing. It's like you have loose arms, but they're in total control. Stiff arms, there's no control actually, because as soon as you hit a compression, the force from your inertia and aided by gravity is going to just get that front wheel to actually continue to slide. Whereas loose arms, it can slide, but you can kind of pull it back, and you can pull yourself back further on the seat, or add a little bit of back brake to kind of slow the bike down, create like a pulling feeling through the bike, as opposed to something that's actually jamming it with the front brake, which is a compression.
Yeah.
But then, second of all, I actually find the biggest culprit in people's inability to go fast downhill on a gravel descent that's fast and flowing is that people don't have any faith in their ability to slow down. They don't feel as if you can brake safely if you're going too fast into a corner. Now,
because they're relying on contact patch.
They just assume that if they're forced to brake too hard late, it's going to start a skid or a drift on the front wheel, which is going to freak them out. So one issue already there is that they're probably not used to the fact that their bike is going to move a little bit underneath them. But two, because they're actually scared of braking late in case it goes bad, they go into the corner and they actually start braking so early. And there was a few times today that in some of the groups that I was in, good riders, some of them ex-WorldTour, some of them national level road cyclists in the USA, some gravel riders with pretty damn good palmares, and I would be at the back of the group, because that's just where it sort of laid, where we went over the top of the climb, and I think, no need to go around these guys. But then as we're approaching the corner, they start braking so early that I'm left with almost no option but to go around them and to go in front of them through the corner.
So you don't have to use your legs later to make a gap or close a gap.
Yeah. Or just it feels safer, because there's this strange thing, which is probably too hard in the context of this conversation, but there is actually a speed that actually makes it safer to go through the corner, where you're actually adding an extra little bit of, I guess, load into the contact point with the
slower
dirt.
Is not always safer. Yeah, because as you're leaning correctly with the right speed, and assuming you have the right weight distribution and force, you're actually driving the tread into the surface.
Right. So a little bit more speed, or the right amount of speed, actually makes it a safer corner.
Yeah.
There's obviously too much speed, which then breaks that.
Right. And too little can as well.
So I would go around because it actually felt too slow to then go through the corner. And then I would look back and I would be 50 to 100 meters in front of everybody. And and it got me thinking as well, like what's the main issue here? I've actually done quite a few skill camps with riders in Girona, and one of the drills that we practice for a good half of the session is actually confidence in braking drills. And one of the best drills to actually do is to find a straight stretch of gravel road, safe, no traffic. Safety first always when doing any kind of drills or repetitive line choice practice. Is you take one of your biddens out of the bike and you put it in the center of the road. You draw a line in which you're going to start, which is maybe 50 or 60 meters away from the bidden, and you have a speed in mind that you're going to come at that line every single time. So maybe it's 35 kilometers an hour, which I think is a really good speed to come in at, because that's a little bit above an average, or right on the kind of average speed that you would have on a flat gravel road if you're in a bunch.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite a practical speed.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you hit that line, and then you choose to yourself where you're actually going to start braking from to be able to make a 180-degree corner around this bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why this is a safe drill to practice this is if you realize you're coming in with too much speed, and you don't feel like you could make the turn, well, you just don't make the turn and you go straight. So it's like, you've got a really safe bailout option. It's like it's like one of those things on the highway that trucks can, do aversive action.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is you set a point, you start at it, you approach the bidden, and you brake, and then you realize by the time you actually get to the bidden, wow, I could have braked a lot later.
Yeah.
I slowed down for way too long before that. And there was actually a lot more meat on the bone in terms of where I could brake to. So then the next time, you brake a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, a little bit later, and a little bit later. And it's a rate of diminishing returns. Like the first steps are, often meters later, and then you're starting to actually maybe get to like 10 centimeters or 5 centimeters later. But
yeah. And then maybe you go past, you knock over the bidden.
Yeah, and you go, okay, that one was actually too fast. So you're actually finding your limit, but you're doing it in a safe way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the advantage of this is that you're actually retraining your brain. You're actually using, you're integrating your brain and the sensation that it's actually having from the ground, and the speed and the speed of approach to this same challenge. But what's happening is that you're actually calming your nervous system, and you're actually getting more comfortable in being faster, closer towards something, because now you actually intuitively believe and feel that you can brake later and safer without actually having a loss of traction. This is assuming that people know to put their weight behind the bike when they're braking.
Yes.
And also which brakes they're using. I won't say who it was, because she would kill me if I said it now, but I was doing a session with a good friend, and I was like, "Oh, which brakes were you using through that corner?"
Yeah.
She was like, "Both," and I was like, "Are you predominantly front or predominantly like back braking?" And she says, "Oh, which one's the back?"
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, "Oh shit! Whoa, you're a really good bike rider. Like,
you need to know
how
this.
Have we skipped this class?" And, so it's really important. So I'm not trying to necessarily go through this session here to say like this is the how to do it. This is something that Colby and I might get to at some point. But there is a lot of small detail to it. But when we kind of zoom out here on what I'm trying to say is that a lot of people on gravel bikes, even though they're fantastic road riders, they're not very good at trusting that they can actually brake in time. So they start to actually brake really early. Yeah. So that the gap that I actually have on these riders, I would say most of it has actually occurred before we've even gone through the corner. So then if I do happen to carry more speed through the corner, and then take out more speed from the corner without acceleration,
then
that
it just
gap
multiplies
grows,
the effect.
and it's really quite astonishing how much you can make in one single corner,
right?
Which we both found today. And we're not trying to we're not trying to pump up our tires here. We're trying to actually illustrate a point, is that braking control and confidence in braking is something that a lot of people don't actually spend time doing specific skill drills on. And it would be something that I would urge everybody to do next time they feel to themselves, I want to get out on the bike. I don't really want to go for long. And then they're on the bike. I'm not feeling it. I'll go home. Don't go home. Yeah. Go practice some drills. Never skip skills day.
I think it's interesting because the sport's in a weird place right now. Like there's such an emphasis on engine size and watts per kilo and, grams of carbs, and everybody's counting all the things. But what we see is this weird outcome at races where people do have insanely strong engines, but then they're lacking these other basic skills, which is really the same way of saying exactly what you just did, which is never skip skills day. And it may be weird for someone who's quite accomplished as a gravel rider, for example. Maybe they're on, in the top 10 at Steamboat, either pro men or pro women. but they're actually lacking some really good skills. And today's a day where that could definitely be the case, probably was the case, because, well, for sure it was, because I know some of the riders you were talking about in your race, and some of them were top 10, not to name names, or close. And so it's like, why do we have this outcome where people who have clearly very developed, very strong engines, they're unwilling, or maybe they don't know, but they're probably unwilling or just don't want to deal with this type of skills development. And look, I mean, I say this in so many forums in my teachings, my discussions with other people, like, cycling is a sport that demands a lot of skills in different areas. You can't just be a Zwift rider and then go win a road race. Like, well, maybe you can, but if you do, either you've freakishly had the rest of the skills in your pocket, which is unlikely, or maybe it was a dipshit road race with no corners. That's fine too. But to win a proper road race or a proper gravel race, you can't just have a giant engine. There's all these things we have to put together: knowledge about tire pressure, skills in cornering, etc. Fueling strategies, just to name a few. But one thing I would like to hear your thoughts on, Nathan, about expanding on this is, so what you've described with this bidden drill, which I think is quite clever, is I think what you're describing is riders would approach the bidden, and as you said, the objective is to hit a certain speed, a known speed, whatever, 35K an hour or something, and then practice braking later safely. And it sounds like you're coaching them to not skid, but maybe not. Maybe sometimes there's a point when they skid. And something I've offered to my riders, I did this at the last gravel camp, is I instructed them, again, as you said, safety is always first. But I liken this to when I was in high school. I went out with a friend of mine, and we learned how to drive in the snow. Now, when you lose control of a car in the snow, you wouldn't know this because you live in Girona and you're Australian. I'm giving you shit. When you lose control of a car in the snow, especially if it's during a turn, you have to turn into the slide to regain control, which most people won't do. Yes. Most people won't do that, right? Because normally when you're sliding, you're heading for something. But it's the only chance you've got, really. You can't hit the brakes. It doesn't do anything. You've already lost control of the car. You're already sliding. And if you turn harder, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to regain front control. So you're either going to crash into a tree or off the ditch or whatever, or you're going to turn into the slide, and then you're going to regain steering control, and then you're going to be okay. And so my friend, this is a childhood friend of mine, we were in high school together, and she pointed out to me, like, one day, like, yeah, people always tell me I have to do that, but I have no idea how to do that. And really what she taught me in that moment was there's a difference between intellectual understanding, which is what we're giving you now, and somatic understanding of a thing, right? We can tell you how to, put your foot on the outside pedal and put your weight on the inside bar and lean the bike so far in this condition and that condition and brake really fast. And what we're giving you right now is an intellectual bullet list of techniques. In order to actually learn that, you have to go out and somatically experience it. Soma meaning body. You have to feel it in your body. You have to feel these things. And one of the things that she and I felt that day was we went to a parking lot covered with snow, and we repeatedly lost control of the car on purpose and then gained control by steering into the skid. And we did it in a safe place. There were no poles or fences or whatever, or there were, but we managed to avoid them all. And both of us agreed, like, wow, everyone should do this. This is a thing that taught us to be much better winter drivers, because we can tell you all day long what to do when the car loses traction. But until you feel it and learn to do it in that moment, you're still not really going to have integrated that knowledge. And so I would offer that, what I offered during my gravel camp was, I want you to begin with the rear wheel. When you're riding in a straight line on a gravel road to your comfort level and safely, I want you to intentionally lock up the rear wheel, just going straight at first, and feel what it's like to have that wheel skid on purpose. And then I gave this disclaimer. This is several levels more advanced. When you're ready, begin to do very short, low speed front wheel lockups. Do this ideally on softer terrain, sandier terrain, and make it very brief. And make sure your weight is back. We talked about the wagon wheel problem, the braking problem, where when you apply the brakes, basically, unless you have really good instantaneous core activation, your center of gravity is thrust forward over the front of the bike. And
it's a compression.
Because of the compression, yep.
It's like a pole vault.
Yeah, and it just sends you forward and you go over the bars. And That's one of the basic ways people crash. Like mostly the wheel's going one way or they're going the other. That's a crash. You go over the front of the bike because you didn't handle a compression properly. That's a crash. Those are two of the most common ways, right? Another way is you just overcooked a corner and lost traction on both wheels, one or both wheels, and you didn't keep it up. Those are three of the basic ways of crashing, aside from running into objects or other people. And so I think it was quite useful for some of my riders to begin to feel what it's like to have the rear wheel slide. And most people could handle the rear wheel sliding in a straight line pretty well. And I wanted them to get really comfortable with that. And then there's progressions from there, which we don't need to go into now, but you would do it, you would start to intentionally kick the wheel side to side, etc. And you would begin to progress at a safe rate. The ultimate objective for me being to improve people's comfort and skill on the bike so that they can descend faster and safer with no additional assumption of risk. And I think that's a really important point. Often I hear riders say, well, I just want to go fast on the climbs. I don't really care about the descents. And to be honest, I think that's a bypass. I think you don't want to deal with it. But I also think part of it is a misunderstanding or a misconception or an assumption that in order to go fast, you have to take on additional risk. And this is actually not the case. If you develop your skills and your understanding, you can go faster and actually safer without increasing risk.
Safety is actually the first goal of skill training.
Agreed.
The byproduct is that you end up going a lot faster
and being more comfortable.
But because you're actually intentionally using applied physics to what you're doing, which means that you're actually in control of what's happening, as opposed to kind of just pointing and shooting. So skill sessions actually make you feel better. But to back it up a second, Colby says somatic understanding. Please correct me if you have a better way of describing it, but somatic actually means using the somatosensory sensory system, which is actually our most peripheral nervous system. So everything that we feel consciously through touch and input into the body is using the somatosensory nervous system. That integrates into the brain and it educates what we're seeing and what we're feeling. This is hand-eye coordination. This is the best way to say it.
And proprioception also.
And proprioception. But this is, it's all the same thing expressed differently. I think the easiest way to explain it is hand-eye coordination. You have to feel what's in your hand.
Feel the pressure of the bars, the washboard, the sliding of the wheel.
Right.
For example, in gravel context.
We could give you a whole lot of theoretical underlying concepts of what to do. But you actually have to go do it. And I really like how you said it. It's like, you're taking small steps so that you can actually digest this, that your, that your thalamus, which I always refer to as the bodyguard, the bodyguard of the nightclub of your brain, doesn't actually, kick up a fight for what's coming in and say, hey, what the hell is that? Right. This is where you start to actually have a really dangerous nervous system response to an input. So if we do it in small steps and we actually educate the brain in thinking, okay, no, I understand that feeling. Now I'll do it a little bit differently. Okay, now I understand that feeling. And it all of a sudden starts to integrate and that hand-eye coordination changes. And the hand-eye coordination of the speed approaching these fast corners is what's going on. This is at a kind of microscopic level or layman's way of turning it, or using Occam's razor to say what's the most simple way to describe it. It's a hand-eye coordination issue. What's really fascinating is that I actually find that there is a much smaller gap between people's ability to very quickly learn how to do gravel single track. Like, we're not talking about mountain bike single track where we're jumping off drops, bunny hopping over rocks, or using jumps, or really leaning into berms where you have to think about, again, counter steering or counter weight balancing and transferring of power and all these things. Sort of talking about like gravel. Imagine like a river path. It's flowy. You don't really actually have to do much. And one of the reasons why I think people do better at that is that we're actually at a lower speed. So their hand-eye coordination of this is like less neurologically challenged. It's not freaking out. But as soon as we get onto a course, which, as you said, had 4 corners a lap, each corner that I went down, it was 50 to 100 meters difference. And then I'm actually waiting for my group afterwards going, you know, and I'm also not trying to, you know,
Blow sunshine up your own skirt.
or throw shade on these riders, because they are, I mean, half of them in the group actually beat me. So, you know, it's sort of, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But the point I'm trying to make is that these fast flowing gravel corners actually are most people's biggest fear in gravel. It's not the single track stuff. It's not the slow speed, sort of more technical stuff. People can kind of figure that out, or jump off their bike and run at the same speed, cyclocross dismounts. The biggest delta between the best and the rest in gravel is high speed gravel descending, where there is a potential loss of traction. And we saw this on fine display today.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. Good discussion. I just want to add also that when I had riders then do the front wheel slide, they all noted that the front wheel slide, for those who opted to do it, was significantly more of a nervous system, we'll say, challenge than bumper sticker on a Tesla ahead of us. This car identifies as a Rivian. That's pretty funny. You know, significantly more nervous system stimulus. Like basically your front wheel slides and immediately it's like a nervous system, like, whoa, a jolt.
Yeah.
Right. That's very unstable for athletes. It's very alarming. And so becoming comfortable with that front wheel slide under the right conditions. This is the mistake people make all the time with things, is they progress stuff, whether it's a transition to more barefoot shoes and they go running, whether it's going from road to gravel, they'll transition too quickly. Right?
Correct.
Into a new stimulus. So I'll make this point again. I'll labor to make this point. Like, don't go be like, oh, Colby, I heard on Colby and Nathan's podcast discussion that I should go around, you know, a bunch of switchbacks locking out my front brake. That's not what we're saying.
No.
For sure. So appropriate dose.
I mean, we're talking about
steps.
maybe 2 to 3 kilometers an hour.
Yes, that's the best way to start the front wheel sliding, in a straight line and a very quick touch of the brake. And you want to progressively apply more pressure in little bouts until you find that quick slide. And then just observe what happens in your nervous system, right?
And where the bike goes.
Where the bike goes.
And what happens if you do it with looser arms or stiffer arms, or if your weight's behind the seat or in front of the seat.
Excellent. Yeah.
So Colby often says this, it's a nice little saying, and I'm going to butcher it, so please fix it for me. It's, you know, you might as well look after your health now before you're forced to look after it later. You might as well learn to deal with skids now through training it before you're forced to deal with one, and when you've got no idea what to do. Because there is going to be a point if you're gravel riding that your bike is going to lose traction. And if you haven't practiced and integrated these sensations, somatic experience, and using different you know, theoretical tools to practice on top of that somatic experience, so that you actually have understanding of what to do when the bike does move. It's going to move so fast and so erratically that you are probably going to have a lesson from the pain teacher.
Yes, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. Your basic synopsis is that most of the time people come from road, capable handlers on the road, or average handlers on the road,
or even great,
and they go to gravel and their abilities are significantly reduced to whatever degree. And most of that is because they're uneasy with the idea of the bike moving under them, or the terrain, really. Not when you ride around asphalt most of the time, unless it's raining or you're riding in Europe on a pile of diesel, the asphalt behaves somewhat predictably, right? Like, you can lean into a corner and you get a certain result, and you don't often expect or anticipate that the tread will lose contact with the surface. That doesn't happen that often. It happens. You just need the right conditions. It happens. But most of the time it doesn't happen. But in gravel, that paradigm changes. So I think that's one of the biggest drivers of this delta between road handling and gravel handling. I think the other driver that really impacts the transition point is, I think you can be quite a bit sloppier on the road with your actual weight distribution on the bike. You can get away with it. At reasonable speeds. And so the delta won't be like rocketing you out of the back of the group if you don't have the correct weight distribution. And by weight distribution, what I mean is the center of gravity relative to the bottom bracket in all 4 planes, well, really all 6 actually, And also, that is to say left, right, front, back, and up, down, those directions. And the center of gravity is just behind the belly button in most riders most of the time. About 2/3 of the way back from the belly button, even in a cycling position. And I also mean pressure points on the pedals and the bars in the seat, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have 5 contact points, 2 hands, 2 feet, 1 butt. And
I like to add a 6th, your eyes to everything.
Your eyes to everything. And so when we think about how our weight distribution changes when you're riding on a climb or on a flat road versus in a corner, whether that corner is on flat road or on a descent, there are very big changes that need to happen. And on the road, when people aren't super proficient at those changes, they kind of get away with it a lot. But on gravel, those weight distribution changes become much more critical. And so when people don't understand the basics, suddenly that delta grows. I think those are the 2 biggest reasons in my mind currently to explain this delta. The first one is the one we talked about, for sure. The changing terrain, or the uneven and unpredictable gravel terrain, and the relative discomfort with that, which then leads to overbraking into corners. Yeah.
Overbraking and essentially a sympathetic body posture,
Response,
which is
yeah.
Tense arms,
Mm-hmm.
shoulders up,
Yep.
rib cage pressing on basically on every way in which you can breathe. It shortens your breath, creates more of a sympathetic response.
Yeah. Spinal flexion.
Spinal flexion.
Yeah. Short
and
pecs.
And often rising of heels.
Yes.
Which is actually the opposite of what you want.
You want to do.
If you want to watch people express the foot position that you should have through anything technical, it's cross-country mountain bikers.
Mm-hmm.
Heels are down.
Yeah.
And we can explain that on another day, because that's actually a very complicated thing to explain.
It is, but it explains why some people never like the scissor pedals, even though I actually thought they were brilliant, because if you rode with your toes down, you would clip out of them. And Richard said this over and over again. Yeah, when you ride with right technique, you don't clip out of them on descents. And people were like, falling off. Anyway.
So anyway, we probably babbled on and off about that. Steamboat was absolutely fantastic. Colorado is a really special place for me in my history and story of bike racing. And it was just an absolute pleasure to be able to come back and experience this beautiful part of the world with some fantastic people, to challenge myself physically and mentally in a bike race. And I enjoyed every second of it.
Me too. I'm really glad you came and joined us. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you, Colby.
Hey, tell everyone what you said. You rode 34 road tires. What actual tires did you ride?
They were the Schwalbe G...
RS?
No. It's just called the G1.
G1. But it's a road.
It's actually a road tire.
Yeah.
The casing on this tire is exceptionally tough and strong.
Mm-hmm.
And we were actually advised by Schwalbe for many races in Europe to actually give it a go. That was before people started using mountain bike tires.
Yeah.
And there were some courses that you just literally couldn't keep up with their new capabilities. So I haven't really used them much, but I didn't bring them with me. So we went over to, what's the shop called in Boulder? XL Sports in Boulder. Stock Schwalbe.
Excellent shop.
And, sponsored rider, but I'm buying tires when I need what I need.
Dude, that's professional right there. Bring the right tool for the job.
Yeah. And if you don't have it, invest.
Get it. Solve the problem.
And they were amazing. I ran them at 55 PSI with a proverbial shitload of sealant inside, just in case. And I had my dyno plugs ready, but thankfully there was no issue all day. So yeah, Schwalbe make a really good road tire that you can ride on road and off road. And 34 is a pretty fun thing to ride on.
Nice. 34 is a great tire size. I have a road bike with 32s, and it's amazing. Love it.
But honestly, my road bike I have now has got 32s because, why not?
Yeah.
And wow, that's so much fun.
They're so much fun.
And I feel safer when they have to brake all of a sudden too.
Yeah.
So
That gives you extra insurance in all situations.
Yeah.
Just that wider tire.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well,
I rode Vittoria Terreno Dries 45 in the front, which was definitely overkill for today. I just didn't actually have time to deal with changing stuff. So I just went with it, and I pumped it up to, I ran that at I think it was 33 PSI, which for that size tire is like quite a bit,
That's
but it
pretty
felt
tough.
great.
Yeah.
But again, today's course was largely so smooth.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rear, I have a different rim in the rear. My bike's got kind of a mullet setup, so it's a much skinnier rim. So I had a 38 on the rear, and I ran that at 35 or 36, I think. And it worked out.
Nice.
Yeah, good
Nice.
stuff. Good stuff. Well, thanks, Nathan, for your gravel thoughts. Thanks for coming to Colorado.
How would you say gravel thoughts with no vowels? Gravel toots, goods,
Gravel tools,
Fugguts.
That'll be the title of the pod. Gravel tools.
Excellent.
Very
People
good.
will definitely know what we're talking about.
For sure. Thanks for listening, everyone. Be well. Enjoy your gravel safely. Practice some skills. That's our suggestion.
Never skip skills day.
Never skip skills day. Be well. Voila.
Et voilà.
Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. We will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypearce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of cycling and alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.